Out of interest, I'm guessing this is a room full of friendlies. How many people here actually, let's say, were vaguely happy that Obama got elected the last time round? Yeah. Oh, so this is pretty good. So I'm actually not preaching just to the, well, maybe you're all converted now. Are you all blue Republicans now? Hands up, like you've identified blue. Okay, good. I'm not everyone, so I'm not just preaching to the converted. Great. All right. So let me. Some of you I know what this whole blue Republican thing is and where it came from, but I guess some don't. Am I talking too fast with my strange accent? Can you hear me? Okay, good. This is kind of a laid-back setting, so just heckle or tell me to shut up or tell me to speak slowly. So I got this random, it seemed at the time, pretty random gig being invited to write for the Huffington Post, which I'm sure you've all heard of. It's like one of the top 20 or 30 most trafficked websites on the planet, believe it or not. And I dabbled in writing online, but most writers online seem to me to be doing it because they're narcissists. And I don't have that narcissistic need to tell everybody what I think. Well, I didn't used to, but maybe I do. Just to speak. I just have to get invited to speak to you. But when someone gives you that platform, you maybe think that it's worth a go. You write something because maybe you can make a difference. The first thought that I had when I got the Huffington Post invitation to write, and I'm not employed by them, by the way. They just give me this platform, and I'm a freelancer who doesn't get paid. Is that the readership of this site, they're basically centre and left, and sometimes off the ends left. So that I thought, well, perhaps this wasn't really the right place for me to be writing. But not long ago, actually, I had my own kind of conversion experience to liberty, and realised, as I'm going to discuss today, that progressive means aren't the best way to deliver on good liberal intentions. And it occurred to me that I still remembered what it was like, because it was long ago, to be a down-the-line liberal, and all my audience are part of the liberals. And I thought, I'm going to make the Ron Paul case in that language. Because one thing that libertarians are really good at, and people who support Ron Paul, is getting really excited with other people who support Ron Paul and liberty about how right we all are. And we like to win arguments, and we're quite good at winning arguments, but we're really bad at winning supporters. And those things are completely different. So I thought, Huffington Post, big platform, let's win some supporters. So the argument of this article that I wrote that launched the Blue Republican movement was, if you love peace, become a Blue Republican just for a year. And I think one of the reasons this article took off, and it's kind of led to me enjoying the sunshine of San Diego today, is that I made a point of acknowledging the position of the people who I thought were reading the article, the HuffPo audience, by telling them that they had very good reasons, as I think I did, for supporting Obama back in 2008, and they were quite principled reasons. And indeed, many of the reasons I'm now supporting Ron Paul are the same reasons that I wanted to see Bush and his neocons punished in America. So, and the case, the superficial case in the article was that, look, if the good reasons, the principled reasons for supporting Obama were that under Bush we had wars of choice going on. We had a massive takedown of civil rights, Patriot Act and so on and so forth. And also, this ongoing rise of crony capitalism. Now, if those kind of huge things were your good, solid liberal reasons for voting for Obama, if you're going to stay true to your principles, there's now only one thing you can do, which is become a Republican to make sure that the only guy who's standing for those principles, who happens to be Republican, Ron Paul, gets elected. And obviously there are a lot of people who vote out of just party allegiance, and I wasn't talking to them. I was, I guess, trying to nudge some consciences. Now, you could just say, well, yeah, that's fine, but why, if that was going to work on these people, why aren't they already libertarians? The reason they're not already libertarians is because libertarianism, right as it largely is, has a huge branding problem. And I obviously wasn't the first guy to come up with this idea of, why don't you switch to the party of the guy who believes in what you believe and make him president? This is not an interesting original idea. But the name was new, And Shakespeare was wrong when he said that it arose by any other name would smell as sweet. It wouldn't. Blue Republican worked because it was quite different from, for example, Democrats for Ron Paul, which have been around for ages and haven't taken off at all. And I think it's because in as much as people are coming to Ron Paul, as much as we perhaps are part of this growing movement, which I'm obviously going to talk about, in as much as that's the case, people are saying, I no longer feel comfortable identifying as a Republican or a Democrat. I no longer think that the left or the right, as defined in the mainstream, have all the answers. Right? That there's got to be something else. And you can't sell something or something else unless it has a name. The name libertarian is already sullied. Nobody knows what classical liberal is, and that sounds academic-y anyway. Right? The Constitutionalist Party have never won anything. And this is the land of sales and marketing. So I think there was just something about that name Blue Republican which seems to have worked. Why Blue Republican? Ron Paul is a Republican. So I want to identify people who are in the party and but not of the party. Because most people are making a decision that many of the people, obviously many of you guys in this room have made. Probably spent many years of your life down the bar with your friends saying how awful these evil Republicans are. And I'm really asking them all to go to the dark side, right? So I need a way of getting you to the dark side without feeling that you're really joining the dark side. So I'm going to start with a little précis of everything that's wrong with America. And I'm sorry that there's so much on this slide. When I started doing this a few months ago, there wasn't as much. But each time I give a lecture, they come out with some, like after I did the lecture in Michigan, then we had the NDAA, so I had to add that. And then after the lecture in Boise, we had the National Defense Resources Preparedness Executive Order. Have you heard of that? We'll talk about that. So I had to squeeze all this in. So this is just, the expansion of this slide is my way of plotting the rise of tyranny in the United States. Okay, so everything on this slide has been brought to you over decades by both Democrats and Republicans, by both the left and the right. But properly understood, the liberal and conservative principles, I think, are equally offended by what we have seen go on under all these titles. And one thing I want to point out now, and I'm probably going to go back to it later, is that everything that's been done to your liberty and everything that's been done to damage this country, in my opinion, comes out of fear. We're in a period of fear-driven politics, right? Everything on this list has been instituted because someone somewhere, whether it's Obama or Congress or bankers or whoever it may be, is scared of what happens if we don't do this, right? So I'm just going to go down this list a little bit. Problems here, problems of liberty in America. So the banking system and systematic transfer of wealth from productive citizens to financial institutions. This has been going on, well, you can count it since 71, you can count it since 1913. I'm going to talk quite a bit about this because in some ways it underlies a lot of the other things. And I don't want to talk about the things that are obvious, I want to talk about the things that are less obvious. I'm hoping that you'll come out of here going, I learned something I didn't know. Related to that is spending, government spending. Now, this is actually interesting. Everybody complains about government spending too much, and people think that there was a solvency crisis in this country. If there was a solvency crisis in this country, we would be much, much better off than we are. The problem, actually, that we have in this country is that we have infinite government solvency, right? Not insolvency. And so I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why that means that we're all living in a kind of economic totalitarianism, which sounds really dramatic, and I try and avoid dramatic words because I'm English, so I do understatement. But I thought a long time about what word describes this, and there was no other word. So economic totalitarianism, I'm going to talk a bit about that. Cronyism, don't need to say much about that. We have the revolving door, don't we, and many revolving doors. Privacy, this is one, I don't know, I feel kind of, I take personally. Fourth Amendment, you don't have any privacy now. The Fourth Amendment's gone. It was gone under the Patriot Act, but now they're just obviously adding offence to offence with some of these other things that we'll get to. TSA, I guess some people don't mind that. I think it's disgusting and it doesn't work. And right now there are people, your conversations your cell phone conversations or maybe even your Skype conversations are being routed or routed, routed through offices all over the country to be listened to by effectively civil servants, government employees, who have no warrant, just in these huge data trawls. This is going on without your being notified, and this is going on en masse. So you have no Fourth Amendment right anymore. Financial privacy. Also very important. This one touches me quite a lot because I'm, being British, I have a bank account in Britain. And because I have a foreign bank account, I have some money somewhere perhaps that the US government can't get its hands on. They make me fill in a form to tell them where all my foreign money is. And this is nothing to do, by the way, with your tax returns, right? I obviously complete I'm an American taxpayer, so I complete those tax returns, honestly, because I'm terrified of what happens if I don't. But still, I have to send a completely separate document to the Treasury, right, to tell them where all my money is. So they, you know, why? I just asked the question, why? Why do they need to know? So due process, well, that's gone. I'm guessing everyone in here knows about the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows any American citizen on American soil to be locked away without trial or without being found guilty of any crime. Are you ticking off all of the amendments of the Bill of Rights that we're, yeah, because you should be, okay? Oh, assassination, Alan Larkey, okay, this was a good one. So they got our liberty, but we still have our lives, so we thought. I understand that there may be times when killing a citizen maybe is the right thing to do. I can get that theoretically. What disturbs me, most of all perhaps, is that we have come so far down this road that the executive can order this, along with the collateral damage of this man's 16-year-old son, who was not guilty of any crime. You know, there's no dispute there. And the president does not then have to get on the TV in prime time to explain to us how it is we still have any rights as Americans. I would listen to that. I would listen to him if he did it. But the fact that he doesn't even deem it necessary makes me want you to ask the question, how the hell did we get here? So wars not in self-defense. I mean, this was the only time I was politically active until I discovered, you know, Liberty and 1 in 2009 was marching against the Iraq War. So obviously this is a big beef I had with Bush. But now, of course, you know, Bush went to Congress. Now we don't have wars. We have kinetic military action, I think. Yeah. Because you don't have to go to Congress for that. So, you know, again, killing people by another name is all different, right? So the name matters. The name always matters. Militarism. Okay, this is different. If you don't remember anything that I say tonight, please go home and stick the name Robert Pape into YouTube. Robert Pape was the Chicago professor who headed up the study that was funded by the Department of Defense. He was employed for this by the Department of Defense to actually determine the actual causes of suicide terrorism. And the Department of Defense study, it was the biggest terrorism study ever done in the history of the planet, determined that over 95% of all suicide terrorism is committed against people who represent a country that is deemed to be occupying militarily the land of the terrorists. So even those people that we label as religious fanatics, the Islamo-fascists, there are Islamo-fascists in Sudan and in Iran, but the ones we got attacked by were in Saudi Arabia, because that's where our military is. And we, the Department of Defense, our own government has discovered that you're nearly always attacked for reasons that are kind of secular, that are territorial. Despite that, don't take that from me, don't take that from from Noam Chomsky. That's government findings. So important was it to them that they proceeded to institute a series of defense reviews that resulted in something called offshore balancing. If you have a military and you stick it in the country, with 95% certainty, you will get attacked by suicide terrorists from that country. So don't do it. So how do you use your military? You keep them offshore. Our own government has worked all this out, and still we're sending you know, what was it, the Onion called it, killer death robots, you know, over countries and thinking it's going to make us safer. I mean, it's completely insane. So I'm not going to say anything actually much about Ron Paul's policy, Ron Paul's views on these things. In the campaign season, it's very easy for anybody to go and find them. I want to give you some reasons to support some of the bigger ideas that this man stands for, and indeed to vote for him, that perhaps are not so obvious as the ones you might be more commonly exposed to. But when it comes to Ron Paul's foreign policy, this is important. The reason to support Ron Paul and foreign policy is there's only one. It will make us safer. That's it. That's it. But don't take it from me. Do your own research. Yes, truth is a crime. This is the most Orwellian thing of all, I think, that we have now in the United States. You can commit a crime by telling the truth. So how about this for an abuse of the First Amendment? If someone under the Patriot Act, a federal agent, writes a warrant without any judicial oversight, agents can now write their own warrants on the paper. And that is served on you. For example, this agent wants to search your house. And your wife comes home and you tell her, you have committed a crime by telling her the truth. And something else you'll see here, I've put FinCEN. This is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Anybody heard of that? No. No? Okay, a couple. Okay. So how about this for scary? If you go to your bank tomorrow and you do something you don't usually do, like deposit, well, I don't usually deposit $5,000 in cash, so that's my example. Right? The bank is required to write up a special activity report on you. That gets sent to the government. Right? There are millions of these being written every year, millions, and it's growing fast. But get this, if you deposit the $5,000 in cash and then you ask the bank if they have just submitted one of these special activity reports, suspicious activity reports about you or your account, it's illegal for them to actually answer you honestly. Truth is a crime in this country. Okay, I mean this was the one I just added this week. Executive Order 13603. Under Clinton, it was the president had claimed by executive order the power to override any private contracts and to have secretaries of government agencies overrule and override government contracts. Private contracts, right? So basically allowing government to take over all areas of trade, all areas of your life, all the ways in which you transact with other Americans. But under Clinton, until last week, in fact, that could only be done under emergency conditions, when a national emergency had been declared. This latest executive order is exactly the same order with the words "or non-emergency" inserted. Don't take it from me, just get online, Google that, you'll find it. And of course all of this is unconstitutional. As Jim Clyburn, a representative, said, well, most of what we do up here is unconstitutional, referring to the Hill, referring to Congress. He said that in an interview with Napolitano, Judge Napolitano. Okay, so what I want to... you can turn on the TV and find out all these things that are wrong. And, but what I'm interested in is, what is it that we're doing wrong? How are we thinking wrongly that enables this all to carry on? Like, how did we let this happen, right? Because if we can see what bit of this we're responsible for and can control, then we can start doing or thinking differently, right? So I just want to, in true Blue Republican spirit, and Blue Republican spirit is breaking down left and right, which of course was on the title of this talk, I want to quote a man who is a hero of the left. I'm going to quote right now, named Chomsky, and later I'm going to quote a hero of the right. But I'm just going to read this out because I think it's very pertinent. The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. Even encourage the more critical and dissident views. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time the presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of the debate. Presuppositions of the system are in bold because it's the presuppositions of the system that the left and the right, the Democrats and the Republicans, not only never argue about, but they have built. And sometimes the people who are Democrats, are Democratic and Republican congressmen and other politicians, they don't even realise the shared assumptions they have with their opponents. But it's the shared assumptions, it's all the things that aren't questioned, aren't even spoken about most of the time, that have determined the mess we're now in. Now, one of the interesting things for me as a non-American in the US is the fact that everything is left and right here. There's only two teams. Everything's like a football game, right? And this means that you can, if you're a Republican, all you really have to do to get support is sufficiently demonize the Democrats, and then by default you get support. And of course, vice versa. Yeah. And it seems to me that this plays out in, this is ending now. I mean, very, very slowly, and I want to be part of ending it. So what I'm describing to you is slowly breaking up, and that's a good thing. But in the main, I could ask the average American their views on taxation and abortion. That's all I need to know, because then I know what team they're in. Are they in donkey team or elephant team? Right? And once I know what team they're in, I know their views on everything else. Right? So you go to Europe, it kind of doesn't work this way. Right? So this is I would say, a problem of the two-party political institutions that plays out in the culture. And then, plays out in people's thinking. So it's very limiting. It's kind of like this vicious circle, right? Institutions to thinking, to institutions to thinking. And indeed, libertarians often talk about regulatory capture. We've seen an awful lot of that recently. Well, the Democrats and Republicans have basically written the laws to make sure they maintain the duopoly of political power. So obviously, this situation is maintained quite deliberately. And quite explicitly, and it's a huge problem. Now, the Democrat and Republican, two sides, correspond to left and right, two sides. Now, I want to think a little bit about these words left and right. This was a bit of an aha for me when I kind of had this idea. I don't know if you'll find it as convincing. But left and right are very subversive notions, words to use to describe politics, right? For a number of reasons. One is that left and right purport to refer to everything. Right, if I stand here, left and right is everybody. There is nothing that is not on your left or your right. So when you listen to, you turn on CNN and there's some issue being discussed, and you hear your Democrat and your Republican, and you think you've heard from the left and you've heard from the right, the first thing you think is that you've now had all political space covered. Right? There's this prejudice that because you've got the representative of one side and the other, there is nothing that is on left or right. So you don't then ask the question, well, what else is there? What other completely lateral or radical other perspectives could there be on this? So that limits our thinking, going back to that Chomsky quote. But another way these notions, these words are even more, just as subversive, is that left and right are opposites. Right? So you hear that Democrat and that Republican on CNN. And because you already know that you're hearing two opposite views, that's your filter. What you don't bring to your more conscious mind, you don't even ask the question, is what are all the shared assumptions here? What are all the things that aren't being talked about? What are all the things that the parties represented by both of these men have already brought into that aren't even up for discussion or debate? So the left and right are opposites. But again, when we use those terms to describe political views, we're not really hearing opposites. We're only ever hearing that much of a problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Or like a circle.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So, now another one which I'm going to leave for later is this idea that left and right are not really symmetrical. And what I mean by that is that left and right, they're not even describing the same thing. We'll get to that later. I'm using the word symmetrical in the way that physicists and mathematicians and chemists will be kind of already comfortable with, but I'll describe it later. Right, so the next couple of slides are going to get a little techy. Right? You're going to have to stay with me, then it's all going to get easier. But to open your mind to the techy economics bit that's coming, I've just got a few quotes, because I want you really despairing before we start. Rothschild, now that's a name you will know. He said, "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws." The list of quotes here are all from insiders of our monetary system, our economic system. Some of them in the Bank of England, where we have basically the same monetary system as the Americans do. They who control the credit of the nation direct the policy of government and hold in the hollow of their hands the destiny of the people. If we haven't seen that kind of empirically proven in the last couple of years, then I don't know what we've seen proven. And finally, just because it's the most dramatic, when one gets a complete grasp of the picture, the tragic absurdity of our hopeless situation is almost incredible. But there it is. There it is indeed. And that's from one of your own Federal Reserve bankers in Georgia. Yeah, that's cause for hope, isn't it? He's the guy who should be defending the system. Of course, the reason it is there is because we haven't voted in Ron Paul yet. Okay, so now this is the techie bit, right? A lot of people who already know that they love Ron Paul tend to know at least half of this slide, but most people I've met get the other half wrong. There are basically two ways that money is made. Now, my whole Blue Republican shtick is I'm making a liberal case. I'm making a case for people who have identified Democrat, independent, who supported Obama for perfectly solid, well-intentioned reasons. People who do not want to abandon the ideas of social justice and economic justice. And I don't think to vote on Paul to basically become part of what I hope will become an increasingly broad liberty movement in this country. I don't think you have to abandon those ideas, those principles. This is scraping really badly, isn't it? Okay. Did that one. Okay. Now, the thing that I'm leading to in the next couple of slides is that, certainly since FDR, and you might be able to go back further, the left, broadly described, the left have used progressive means to deliver on liberal ends. And at the start of these big progressive programs, perhaps going back to the 40s, maybe it was common sense that if you have government that legislates, and you want social justice and economic justice, then the way to do it is to legislate it. Right? You can legislate the ends. But what we've discovered, the reason I think Ron Paul is now getting traction, the reason the country's in a mess, the reason the Blue Republican meme is taking off, and there are banners today that say Blue Republican on the I-10 and the I-5, I was delighted to find out, is because people are starting to work out that the ends and the means aren't the same. The means that people always call liberal, or progressive, right? I'd say progressive in the worst case, haven't delivered on the liberal intentions. And the reason they haven't, broadly, is because what the left has done for the last half a century or more is treat the symptoms. Right? Wealth distribution problems, more tax up there, more welfare down here. It can't work because it leaves the disease intact. Just treats the system. So I'm interested in saying, vote Ron Paul if you're a liberal, because he's going to treat the disease that if you're a genuine liberal, you need treated. And this is what this slide is about. What is the disease? At the base of the disease is the financial system. You need to know the two ways money is created. And most money is created when a guy walks into a bank and says, I'd like a mortgage, or I want to borrow some money. Right? So how does it work? Guy walks into a bank, says, I have a house, I want to borrow $100,000, for example. And the bank says, certainly. And creates out of nothing $100,000 that now appears as money in his bank account. At the same time, a liability of $100,000 is also created. That man has to pay the $100,000 back. Right? But of course, the liability is never created just like that. It's always created with interest. Over time, that man actually has to pay back, let's say, $200,000. Right? He has to pay back the interest. Now, how does he do that? There's only two ways he can do that. He either goes to work being productive and then moves money that he's earned, gives it back to the bank. Right? So you've got to transfer basically the productivity of labour, which is a real asset, going to the bank. Or he can't pay it back, right? Maybe foreclosure or whatever. And what happens then? The real asset itself, the house, we're seeing all of that, goes to the bank. Right? So now more than 95% of all the money in circulation is made this way. Right? It exists only because someone else went into debt. And when you think you're holding wealth, what you're really holding is a little bit of somebody else's debt. Yeah. And so this system inevitably moves real resources, real wealth, to this, let's call them financial elite, that under special license of the government gets to manipulate and create money. Gets to create it and then loan it back to you at interest. But here's the real crazy thing. This guy's got to find this $100,000 over time to pay the bank back as interest, let alone the $100,000 principal. Where does that come from? Somebody else has to go into a bank, right? And go into debt to $100,000 to bring into existence the next $100,000 so the first guy can pay the bank back. So this thing has to increase. It's an increasing debt inflationary bubble. That's not just a problem we're having now. That's not something that happens in the economy. That is the economy. And therefore it is inevitable, and it was always inevitable since this system was established. And in its current form, it was really established in 1971. That those who have this special license, the financial elite, will accumulate disproportionately the wealth of the nation. That was built in. There is no taxation system progressive enough. There are no welfare payments large enough that can, undo this over time. This is an exponential effect, and it just goes on and on. And of course, the people who are most hurt by it are those who don't have assets. Because the only way you can protect yourself against this is to have the real stuff and not have any debt secured on it. Right? And as the money is created and the value of the money goes down, the price of your assets go up. It's a way of protecting wealth. But the American poor, who are the American poor? Well, the bottom 40% of Americans own 0.3% of all American assets. The top 1% own much more than 100 times that. But of course, because that's the system that we've got built in here. Right? Now, if you're a liberal and you think that is not economic or social justice, I agree with you. I don't kind of call myself a liberal with a capital L anymore. I call myself a classical liberal. But I would say, if you're a principled liberal, for that reason alone, there's only one man talking about that. I think there's only one man running for president who even understands it. And that's Ron Paul. Right? So I really want you to think about disease versus symptoms. Right? But there's another way that money is created. And it's a very different way. Created by the government. Now, they will have us under this illusion that you're paying tax to fund government spending. That's what 99.999% of Americans believe. Do they have to tax you? Because otherwise, how can they build stuff and, buy bombs and stuff like that? But they don't. The government creates money when it spends money. If the government wants to buy a warplane, it writes a check that Boeing, let's say, cashes or deposits, right? And the balance of the private Boeing bank account goes up by $1 billion. There is no offsetting government account that gets debited. The government issues money through the Federal Reserve. I'm not talking about the mechanics of the system here with the Federal Reserve. But in principle, functionally, this is how it works. Right? The government doesn't need your money. Because it's a currency issuer, not a currency user. So the federal government is completely different from all the state governments. Right? The state can't, California can't print up dollars like the federal government can. Right? So California truly is in a solvency crisis. Because it's run out of money. Right? It's got to keep borrowing, and who wants to lend them the money? But, and we can talk more about this, because you've probably got a few questions, because it's such a mind blow when you first hear it. We can talk about it later. But the government doesn't need any money from anyone. No, the only reason you have tax is to create the demand for the dollars. Why? If you land on a desert island and there are 100 people going about their business and they've got a rudimentary economy, and you just get off the boat and you want to make yourself king and own everything, all you have to do is force them to use your currency, as long as you're the only person that can issue it. Right? And how do you do that? You say, if you don't pay tax in this currency, I will lock you up. And that's what the taxation system is. That's why I called it... Oh, I have a question. Okay, I'll do questions. Go on.
I thought you said to interrupt you or something.
Yeah, why not? I did say that, so I should stand there.
So, just in the top part here, you talked about this symptom versus core issue. So you said that taxation would not be able to redistribute wealth.
It does redistribute wealth. I mean, obviously its purpose is redistributive, right? But what I'm saying is, what's the underlying liberal principle? Yeah, what's the good that you're trying to do? And I'm acknowledging that that is a good, but I'm saying the fact is you've got like this cancer always growing, right? So if you actually want the taxation system to be, or any other system, to be effective in terms of its stated intention, you have to deal with the underlying problem, right? That's what I'm saying. But I'm saying the impact of this is so huge. Let me give you some, and I should say more about that. Between 1993 and 2007, over 1/2 of all of the economic growth in this nation accrued to the top 1%. Right? Again, it's built into the system. Yeah. Now, why would you compound that abuse by then having the taxation system that you would need to undo this kind of thing would be itself so abusive, right? That all you're trying to do is, you know, is two wrongs make a right on a huge scale. Now let's. Oh yeah, and I want to call this crony corporatism. I'm pleased to see CNN and Fox and all these people talk about crony capitalism a lot more, because I think this is something on which the Tea Party and the occupiers unite. But I do think crony capitalism is wrong. I don't think there's anything capitalist about it at all. It's corporatist, right? Which takes me to the next slide, which is the most complicated. Yeah. It really does get easier after this. The government has corrupted our corporations by corporatist lawmaking. Because the corporations sit at the table. Why? Because the corporations have corrupted government by funding the people that will be passing the laws. Right? They fund those campaigns. They keep them in power. So obviously the money in politics thing, huge issue, huge problem that needs to be dealt with. But you've got to understand exactly how it works. Now, why is it in the interest of the financial elites to have the system that I've just described that allows government to print infinite money and never go insolvent? Well, because I want my lobbying dollar. I want my seat at the table to actually pay me something. I want to get something back for it. Right? And why is it in the interest of the government to keep this monetary system going that favours a certain financial elite? Because this is the financial elite, and those close to it, you know, the huge corporations, that basically bankroll, you know, many of our legislators' campaigns. Now, so I've talked about, this is obviously the fiat monetary system, but the problem is this problem of unsound money, which is itself unconstitutional. Franklin said, you know, the end of the Republic will be when people realise they can vote themselves money. Right? Now, there was the founders wrote into the Constitution a mechanism to stop that happening. They insisted on sound money, and we can talk about what that is. But basically, it's very clear in the Constitution, you can't have this system. Because what we don't have is, we don't have sunsets on laws that fail to deliver on their intended goals. Right? So if you have a bad program, it never stops. You know, have you ever seen a program organically die? I mean, this doesn't happen, like big government program. But rather what happens is, there is no limit on funding. Right? Because there's no limit on funding, there's no limit on the program. It will be funded and funded and funded until it starts to subsume so much of the economy that the distortions become huge. And again, you know, we can get into the economics and questions if you want. Yeah. And what's true about the banks, of course, is true about the other special interests. Now, the welfare is huge. It's a huge issue. I come from a country where you wouldn't believe the welfare system we have. I mean, you just wouldn't believe it. We have, the government spent 48% of all British pounds that are spent by the British government. So we are now semi-communist, I guess. 48% communist. In 1976, the bottom half of Brits owned 12% of British assets. Now they own less than 1%. Okay? So what's happened here? We've had a massive burgeoning of welfare in Britain, even more than in America. And in America now you're approaching 1 in 6 people on food stamps, right? What's happened simultaneously? The idea, the good liberal intention was to give people opportunity, right? Help people help themselves. That is nowhere the case, right? Dependency on federal government has increased by any index that you choose. But the most important figure for me is that as the amount that's been given out in welfare has increased, the people who have been receiving it, and even half of the workers above those who've been receiving it, have been completely decapitalized. Yeah, they're 0.3% of assets owned by the bottom 40% of Americans. But those 40% are getting more welfare than they've ever got. Same in England. So what does that tell you?
It doesn't work.
Well, first of all, it tells you it doesn't work. That is the first argument. But the second argument to make is that actually it makes it worse, and here's why. Right? You've been completely decapitalized, but you survive because of this check. I'm just giving you the trickle. I have removed you have no equity in society. If you actually want to exploit any opportunity, the only thing you can do that with is social and economic capital. Capital is the thing you need to act for yourself. We've taken that away, but we just keep you on the teat, as it were, just enough to survive, right? So what we've really managed to do with this system is maintain the stability at the bottom that allows this corrupt monetary system to continue. So I want to make the case, again, if you're a liberal, right, it's not welfare versus crony corporatism at the top. The welfare at the bottom and the welfare at the top are the same thing. Okay, I've said that liberals need to treat the disease, not the symptoms. Okay, I'm going to go through this slides. I've already touched on some of these things. I'm going to go through this quickly. The JP Morgan, do you know that JP Morgan administers the food stamp program? Do you know that? I'm all for government, contracting out essential government services to corporations that can do it a lot more efficiently than the government. And I'm sure JP Morgan is much more efficient than the government because I've been to the DMV. But isn't it like some kind of wonderfully ironic, sick metaphor that every time somebody else gets a food stamp debit card, that JP Morgan makes more profit? I don't know. I think it kind of says everything.
And they contribute to both sides.
Yeah, and of course, meanwhile, this makes my point, thank you, Carl, yeah, they contribute to the voters in the Congress and the Senate on both sides of the aisle, right? Which really should just tell you everything that I'm trying to tell you here. Another part of this fact that you've got the manipulators of money under special government license gaining huge benefits economically and politically is the fact that the wages of a skilled worker in the real wages, so inflation adjusted, have not gone up in this nation since 1973. That's astonishing, right? When you think about what's happened to the GDP and the huge increases in income at the top. But again, it's all built into the system. Now, none of this is all a bit abstract. I told you it was going to get easier, so now it starts getting easier. That was all a bit abstract and a bit mathematical, but none of this should be a surprise. Because, okay, I can see there is nobody in this room who is a grandmother. I don't know if there's anybody in this room who's a mother. Grandfather, okay, I just complimented you, okay. So you may remember the day when it was quite easy for a family of 4, 2 parents and 2 kids, to be brought up on one income. And the mother had the choice to stay at home. Now look, on the left, clearly we have a lot to thank the left for over the last few decades in terms of improving a number of opportunities. We have seen certain increases in social justice. For example, it's easier now for a woman to do the same job as a man and get the same wage. That problem hasn't been completely solved, but pretty much, right? But what if you are a woman who wants actually to not have to have a nanny for their child? What if you want to actually do what your grandmother did and stay at home to bring up your child and have your husband go out and bring in the bacon, bring in the bread? Do you actually have that choice now? No, you don't. And again, it's a predictable consequence of this system. In most cases, you don't. I mean, the middle class can't afford to do that. It's a consequence of this system. So what I want to say is, this is something that Ron Paul says. You can't kind of cut and dice freedom. You take it all, or you take it not at all, right? And I think we've come to a point now where what the left have given up in economic freedom is now undoing the gains in terms of social choice and civil rights and all of these kind of things, right? And I'm going to take 1 minute here to talk about a concrete example since I'm at a university. This one's quite dear to my heart. run this website called Watching America, and I get hundreds of, I've seen literally hundreds of resumes from people who want to edit political articles, right? We translate political articles and then we edit them for accurate English. And newspaper articles from all over the world. So I see all these resumes. And I routinely get resumes from people with a grade point average of between 3.6 and 4, who do not know how to use an apostrophe. Routinely. And I don't mean physicists and mathematicians. I mean people with international relations degrees. I once called one of these people up and said, how did you get a 3.9 grade point average in the essay subject without being able to use an apostrophe? And she said to me, I've never been taught how to use an apostrophe. Why do I go off on that diversion? Because we have this wonderful liberal program to put more people in higher education. Higher education is the sector of the economy that has the biggest inflation of all, by a mile. It's even much higher than healthcare inflation, if you can believe that. Massive increase in the cost of education. What about the standards? I'm going to say the standards have gone down tremendously. Let's say I'm wrong. Let's say they just haven't gone up. How do you explain the massive increase in debt that students are having to have now when they basically start their working lives? Well, it's quite simple, right? This is the problem with all... This is the perfect example of why progressive programs do not deliver on liberal goals. Yeah? The government says, we will guarantee the money that is lent by these corporations to those students. So if you are in the student loan business, you are in a risk-free business. So you will loan whatever you can, because the more you loan, the more profit you can get, and you have no risk, right? So if I'm running a private university, I know that whatever fees I charge, the students can get that money because the corporations will lend it because it's guaranteed. So what's happened? Of course, the fees have gone up. Right? So what's the outcome? The taxpayer, via the government, has subsidized a set of financial corporations. And the person who's screwed is the person who is supposed to be helped. You, the student. Right? It's a perfect example of progressivism doing the opposite of what it's intended. Right? If you actually want to make good education available to more people, you have to have the best of what the free market can deliver in it, at the very least. And so again, I think the Liberals need to come and look at a lot of these issues that they have reacted against, things like the free market and all these kind of nasty words that have been kind of, and the Constitution that are so, that are so often associated with the right, with conservatives. We need to own those on the left. We need to own those. Sorry, yeah.
Your mic is scraping again.
Thank you. All right, so everything's a disaster. It's all a nightmare. Why should I come to San Diego and bother? It is pretty much of a nightmare, but I think there is some hope. So we're at least halfway through now. So now the sun's going to come out because I'm going to tell you why it's all going to be okay. Things are really awful, but I have a hope. It is a very small hope. It probably won't come good, but there's a chance that it might here. Where I come from in Europe, I've given up hope. And to explain why, I'm going to give you a little anecdote, actually a little Los Angeles anecdote. When I used to live here, about 10 years ago, I was caught in one of those infamous traffic jams, on the I-5 into LA, and I was listening to PBS, and there was an interview, NPR, and I was listening to an interview with an American liberal journalist called Greg Palast. And he is an investigative journalist, and he was doing some amazing work in the US, but no one was really interested in what he was doing. So he went out to England, and he became an investigative journalist for the BBC and The Guardian. And he's written some great books. I would say he's solidly liberal. The Best Democracy Money Could Buy, he wrote, which exposed the corruption that helped get Bush in Florida. Lots of good stuff. Anyway, he was being interviewed on NPR. And he had just had 2 new kids. And the host of the show said, you've now made a career and had your success in Britain. Do you want to bring up your children British? Or do you want to come back to America, where you got so frustrated you had to leave? Yeah, to bring them up. because they expect to be screwed. And there's a basic apathy. And when I heard this, I was just like, yes, because that is so true. I mean, that's the England I left, you know. And you know, so the Europeans, you know, they look down at the Americans. But I've come to America and I've discovered that the other thing that Greg Palast said was also true. And I think we're living it now. He said, you know, Americans, they don't travel much. They get too comfortable, you know, with their awful TV shows, and they sometimes don't even leave the state. And they have these rather simplistic ideas about many things, and all of this stuff. He said, but one of the reasons they do is because if Americans actually knew what the hell was being done to them, they'd get so damn angry there'd be blood in the streets. He said, so I have a choice to bring up my kids ignorant and angry, or only semi-ignorant and not really caring for them. And he said, I choose ignorant and angry. And I guess that's what I've chosen. That's what I've chosen, that's what I And I think that, but I would say that now as I see this movement burgeoning, as I see people finding out for themselves, you know, doing their own, you know, time on YouTube and Google and you know, who is this Ron Paul guy? What is this Austrian economics thing? And, you know, all of this. As I see this going on, I have to say that I actually think American politics has a lot to teach, certainly a lot to teach the Brits and all of Europe. It's a lot more, this might sound a bit astonishing, but I think it's a lot more philosophical. Because I think at least Americans have an instinct, even if they don't know that they have the instinct, they have the instinct that when they're doing politics, they are doing philosophy, they're doing liberty versus tyranny. They're doing the big things, right? Whereas if you have a general election in England, the spectrum of political debate is somewhere between, do we spend a lot more money on the National Health Service, and do we spend a little bit more money on the National Health Service? That's it. Right? All the assumptions, all the rest, we don't question them. Right? Nobody actually questions the liberty or philosophical implications about having socialized medicine and all this. I mean, I'm not saying anything for or against socialized medicine here. I'm just explaining the context, right? So the fact that Americans now are kind of philosophically and appropriately angry is great. And I think it's high time as well. Why now? I think that the Obama election following Bush, you know, the pendulum had gone so far one way, and then we thought we pushed it so far back, and in some ways we kind of have. But in most ways that matter, you know, all those good reasons for voting Obama, the crony corporatism, the killing innocent children in countries from which we're not threatened, you know, and the takedown of civil rights, the Patriot Act and the NDAA and executive order, you know, whatever the number is, right? In all these ways, nothing has changed. So we've had this big difference between expectation that we can remember just like it was yesterday, because it was just yesterday, and what we're actually experiencing. And of course there's the perennial catalyst, which is we're now in recession and people are scared. People are scared financially, right? But the most important reason why there's hope here is the Constitution, America's built-in solution. And why do I say that if I, you know, am someone of liberal sensibility and am trying to convince people of liberal sensibility? Because the Constitution is not of the right or the left. It is profoundly conservative with a small c, and at the same time, profoundly liberal with a small l. Have you read the Bill of Rights lately? It is actually, I mean, you can always call that profoundly liberal with a big L document. What does the Constitution really do? It is the Hippocratic oath for people with power, for politicians. It does no more than say, first, do no harm. And when you're listening to the news, I want you, and you're hearing about all the things that are wrong in this country and wrong in the world, I want you to ask yourself the question, is this really a result of governments not doing something it should be doing? Or is it the result, like every single thing on the list on my first slide, of government doing something that it shouldn't be doing, that it's actually prohibited from doing, and that is having, in some cases, intended consequences, and in some cases, unintended consequences? I would say in every case it's a violation of the Constitution, and it's a violation of the politician's Hippocratic oath, which is first do no harm. Right? You want to sort out economic justice? Sort out the monetary system. Stop doing that thing. You want to stop disenfranchising the poor? Stop doing the bailing out of the banks. You know, you want to I mean, oh my God, I could do 100 of those, so I won't. Now, yeah, I got this little thing up here, a liberal document written by conservatives. I'm referring to the Bill of Rights and the Constitution there. I don't know how the founders would have described themselves, and I've got to do a lot more reading, really, to answer the question. But I wouldn't be surprised if they did not see themselves as progressive. Right? I think these were people who already had a sense of what was right. They were in the Anglo tradition. And the Anglo tradition, it does go back to the Magna Carta. There was the Bill of Rights in Britain of the 17th century, and you can trace a line. These were men who came out of a certain Western philosophical political tradition, and they saw that there was, something abroad, something afoot, a tyranny that was not consistent with it. And they were reasserting it. They were conserving something, therefore. But what were they conserving? They were conserving this march of small l, liberality, increased rights. So basically, if you don't know what classical liberalism is, the Constitution really is a sublime document of classical liberalism. So, and I would say, the reason I even raise this is because I'm asking liberals and conservatives, but I'm asking liberals to vote for someone who most people say is conservative. Well, Paul, in many ways, the normal definition is conservative. But it has precedent, right? Just as conservatives perhaps secured this new country, back then in the 18th century as it was, made it safe for liberal ideas and people of liberal political persuasion, but they were conservative. Churchill did the same. Churchill was a royalist, imperialist, conservative. Right? But in 1940, he was the only thing that stood between the world and fascism. We were waiting for you guys over here to wake up and get with it. But there was a time when the world was made safe for liberalism by this conservative. And it kind of seems to me a little bit that history could be rhyming now with the likes of one Paul. Now, one thing that's a real dirty word for people on the left is American exceptionalism. And it was for me for like years and years and years, until I kind of had another way of understanding it. There is something exceptional about America. It isn't, obviously America's not exceptional just because it's America. Obviously not, that would be just arrogance. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who actually do believe that, and they're probably, I shouldn't say where they live, but they probably live south of, east of here. But I do believe that the idea of liberty, and this is something that I see by, and I translate, I mean not personally, but my team of volunteers, we translate articles from around the world, hundreds and thousands every month, right? The world thinks that liberty in America means the same thing as it means anywhere else. I don't think it does. Because everywhere else, liberty is just another social good to be weighed up with other social goods like justice or equality, right? That's basically what I would say social democracies are. They really are political entities that are happy to kind of just throw liberty up in the air and kind of see where it lands with the others, try and do some kind of best case optimization thing. But this idea of liberty as preceding all other political good, I think is exceptionally American. And I don't think it's obvious that that should be the way to go, but I think it is the way to go. And so the founders then knew something that I've only found out recently. Now, I'm not saying believe that as a religious axiom. I'm saying do your own research. Look at the history of this country, look at the history of Europe, oh my God, look at the history of China. And you will see that, that the protecting of liberty, as it were, before political debate, almost taking out of that is the common good that should be assumed. That is uniquely American. It is exceptional. And if that's what you want to call American exceptionalism, I'm all for American exceptionalism. Okay, so this idea I said at the beginning, and I'm now obviously near the end, left and right are not symmetrical in politics. Now, when you say two things are symmetrical, what they mean is you can map one onto the other. They're describing the same thing, and you can describe one in terms of the other. That's a form of symmetry. But have you ever noticed this? This was another one of my aha moments. I think I have a lot of these. Have you ever noticed that if you're on the left, your friends on the right think that you're deluded? But if you're on the right, your friends on the left don't think that you're deluded. They think you're bad. Have you noticed that? It's not symmetrical. Because deluded and bad are not the same and they're not opposites. They're completely different things, right? One is being right as opposed to being wrong morally. And one is being right as opposed to being wrong functionally. Does that make sense? Right. So what I'm going to say is, the politics of the moderate left, the decent left, so I am not talking about committed communists and socialists, and I am not talking about committed religious rightists and neocons, all of whom, as far as I'm concerned, are the same thing. Right? I'm just talking about everyday decent people wanting to get on with their lives, who may identify somewhat more right, Republican, somewhat more left, liberal. Right? For these people, for the most people, the politics of the left are the politics of intention. If you're on the left, you're on the left because you think the best policy is the policy that encapsulates, that enforces, legislates the good that you intend to see in society. It's common sense, it makes sense. But the people on the right, they don't have a politics of intention, because they don't believe policy works that way. They don't believe you can actually put an intention into a policy and get the outcome that you're intending, right? So that's the source of the asymmetry. The politics of the right are the politics of results. Now, this is why the left and the right always talk past each other, and why people stick in those boxes. And I think once you see this, you can speak across the divide, and you can find the thing in common. And you might say, well, that all sounds great in theory, but, you know, really, how do you know? Well, I'm talking to you now, and I write a Huffington Post, and Blue Republican, you know, shared it every 1,000 times in a weekend, and basically that's where this comes from, right? There is an idea, there's a way of using your opponent's language to explain your idea, to explain your side. And it so happens that left and right, most people are basically decent. Everybody actually shares some principles, shares some humanity and some principles that are even deeper than, you know, left and right. So I'm a physicist by training. I have to put it on a diagram. This is the politics of the left and right? So the liberals, they know that they make their intention out of their good intention, their policy out of their good intention. So, you know, in their paradigm, the conservatives must be on the other side, right? They must be bad, right? But actually, the conservatives are operating on a whole other axis. That's the moral axis. The conservatives are on the functional axis, right? The conservatives are, we have this view, you know, you're free market or whatever, because it works, right? So those guys on the left, oh my God, they just don't know anything. They're just wrong. You know, what they want to do just doesn't work. Right? And that's why people on the right tend not to question the motivation of people on the left. They tend to question the intelligence, right? But of course, you don't have to have either or, because these are orthogonal. I'm getting physicsy again. But you know, these are not opposites, right? There's this quadrant. It's possible to have good policy that actually works. It's possible to find policy that has the right intention and works functionally. And I think here there is a burden largely on the left. The burden on the left is to say, you know what? It may be the case that the economic justice and the social justice that I am wedded to was not best served by those programs that were instituted by people who shared my goals. There may be other better ways to get to where we want to go. And you don't have to give up where you want to go if you're a liberal. But once you see that, you might find you have a lot more in common with the right than you originally thought. And you will find that the overlap is Ron Paul. That's what you will find. It's what he represents in the biggest sense. It's classical liberalism, it's constitutionalism, properly understood. Question?
It's like kind of like the same, like if you're 18 and conservative, you don't have a heart, and if you're 40 and Democrat, you don't have a brain.
Yeah, except yes, but that would be to insult a lot of people, which doesn't work very well if you want to get them on your side. But that is a quote I'm familiar with, and certainly has to see the truth in it. So as I come to the end, I did say that I was going to quote a hero of the right, and I think it's fair to say that Milton Friedman is a hero of the right. And I want just to let him, this is like 1 minute, explain in his words what, in some ways, I've been trying to explain. Because I think this is great.
In my opinion, a society that aims for equality before liberty will end up with neither equality nor liberty. And a society that aims first for liberty will not end up with equality, but it will end up with a closer approach to equality than any other kind of system that has ever been developed. Now, that conclusion is based both on evidence from history, across history, and also, I believe, on reasoning which, if you try to follow through the implications of aiming first at equality, will become clear to you. You can only aim at equality by giving some people the right to take things from others. And what ultimately happens when you aim at equality is that A and B decide what C shall do for D. Except that they take a little bit of a commission off on the way.
So, the reason I mean, that's almost kind of a repeat of what I'm saying, so why would I bother? Because A and B decides what C shall do for D. It's a fantastic template for like understanding everything that's going on right now, right? Because if you're on the left, you might say, they say you're down in the Occupy movement, you know, we've got a few of those camping out in Westlake Park in Seattle. Your A and B is the Treasury and the Federal Reserve, C is the American taxpayer, and D is Goldman Sachs. The Treasury and the Federal Reserve decided the American taxpayer will do for Goldman Sachs. There's your bet. Right? Now, if you're in the Tea Party, you might be more concerned with a different A, B, C, D, B, C, and D, right? You might say that the state legislature and public unions determine what the state taxpayers will do for the public workers. It's always true. The template is true. The problem is the political method. That's the point, right? The method that you use, if the method is one of force, that will determine your outcome. Your good intentions do not determine the outcome of policy. It's the way in which the policy is implemented, right? And it's in the area of implementation that we need to be much more sensitive to what people like Ron Paul are talking about, which is the importance of liberty. Because usually when we're forcing somebody to do something, to redress some balance or do some good, it's because somehow, somewhere else, we've done something unfair or by force to create the problem in the first place now that we're trying to address. So here's my kind of here's my kind of final diagram. Yes, this is how we see American politics, I think. Right, the elephants have the this is like the net in the middle, and the elephants are bouncing the ball to the donkeys, and it's donkeys versus elephants, and they've got you focused on that opposition. The things the donkeys and the elephants are against. And I think this is self-explanatory, right? So yeah, we have this idea that the left versus the right is the divide in politics. But everything that I've been saying, everything that I think Ron Paul is aware of, and I think what Milton Friedman was kind of even touching that there, and certainly what Noam Chomsky knew, is that your country is made by what left and right agree about, right? That's what matters. It's not that divide there that matters. That's the distraction. It's that divide that matters, right? And you will see that actually, properly understood, the donkeys and the elephants are on the same team, right? So what actually is the nature of the divide? All of those things that are tyrannical on the first slide, all of those things which reduce your liberty, that offend liberals and conservatives, I believe, in equal measure, are driven by fear. Your tyranny will always come out of fear. People operating in that paradigm, they need you to agree with them that there's a certain way a country should be, and that you can give them enough kind of force with your support that they can impose it on everybody. Right? That's the modus operandi they share. They're illiberal, they're fearful, and ultimately tyrannical. But the real division then is between that and all the real extremists like Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich and me, who would rather not bomb children, who would rather, not invade your privacy, right? Who would rather not take the money from working people and give them to bankers who have special licenses to do all kinds of things, right? Apparently we're the extremists. But you'll notice if the mainstream, if the Republican, Democrat mainstream and the mainstream media calling someone kind of extremist are out there, that's probably the guy you need to listen to. He's probably the guy you need to listen to. So the other half, the division is illiberal versus classical liberal. And I even put love. To me, the antithesis of fear is love. And I know it's kind of weird in a political talk. But what love really is in its biggest sense, capital L, metaphysical love really, I think, is It's expansive. It says as you wish, right? Even if you love your husband or your wife or your mum or whatever, right? What you're really saying is what you want for them is what they want for themselves. Now that's a different way of doing politics, right? Currently what we have been doing in politics is, I want this for everybody, so you lend your weight to what I want and we will force it on everybody. But the Ron Paul way of doing politics, right? The liberty way, the thing that gets people excited, right? The reason that people like me and who come to Ron Paul from the Democrats have like a conversion experience is because they go, well, sheesh, I can actually hold some things passionately myself. And I don't have to impose them on anybody. And once you work that out, once you work out that you could actually establish a country full of good and productivity and fearlessness that works, that doesn't require telling other people what to do, that's, you don't come back from that. You don't go back and read the Communist Manifesto and go, oh my God, I was wrong, I really want to be a communist, right? So that's what Ron Paul's support, the liberty movement support, is like a ratchet. I called this line, this was like a little tongue-in-cheek joke, the Heinlein. There is a science fiction writer called Heinlein, spelled differently, who said the human race divides politically into those who want people to be controlled and those who have no such desire. And that's near enough it, right? Ron Paul, Constitution, Blue Republican, we're at the bottom half of that. We're divided from the rest by the Heinlein. So, I'm just going to skip to the end. Because people need cake, don't they? So, I know all that sounds, there's big ideas there, it's general, some of them are kind of deep. But look, we can actually do this practically, right? The occupiers know there's a problem. The Tea Partiers know there's a problem, right? This is a great start. First part of solving the problem is saying there is one. So how then do people with this kind of political passion, who are basically anti-establishment, whether they're, libertarians, whether they're occupiers, whether they're Tea Party, whatever, what can we bring them together over? Well, I think we can bring them together over loads of things that take into account everything that I've said, right? And I'm just going to, these are just some I stuck in an article. I think, maybe with some tweaks, the left and right can agree on this. A system in which members of the boards of large banks have positions in the country's central bank should be eliminated. I think Conservatives and Liberals can agree on it. Government officials should not be allowed to provide support for companies with which they are or have recently been associated. Again, I think Liberals and Conservatives can agree. Wealth should be a function of hard work, risk-taking and a bit of good luck. It should not be the result of a systematic transfer of wealth to a financial class with a special license, as I described, by government to create money as debt and profit from fees and interest on that created money. I think left and right can agree on that. A system that allows profits to be private while socialising losses should be eliminated. Again. Wars that kill innocent people are bad if they're not in self-defence. How simple can you get, right? A minimum condition for military activity is that it must make us safer. The Bill of Rights is still the law of the land. Telling the truth should never be a crime. Where government spending does not produce its intended benefits, it should stop, even if we, left and right, disagree on whether it should be redirected or not spent at all. If we just did that, first of all, the only person you could vote for is Ron Paul, by a mile. You can't agree with that and vote for Obama. Can't, you just, not with any honesty. Right, Ron Paul's the only guy close to it. He's the only one that even understands it. Right? But regardless of whether you vote or not, if we could just do that, we would have moved so far back in the direction towards the Constitution, towards our own civil rights, that we would live in a completely different nation. And I'm not sure that's not doable. So with that, I will say, go and eat cake. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks Robin, I really enjoyed that. So in just a moment, I'm going to open up for questions, but just a few. Okay, so with that, let me bring Robin back up here, and we'll take any questions you might have. He touched on a lot of subjects, and some of them quickly, some of them are difficult, and
if people want to get food before we do this, I'm happy with that. I mean, people might be championing.
Yeah, I mean, they can get food at the
come back to
I
see
think.
Whatever.
Yeah, so if you have questions, I mean, some of this stuff, maybe you're seeing for the first time, I don't know. He's already acknowledged that we are basically ignorant Americans, so he will not judge it. And so, yes.
You said, or it was in one of your slides, that the left tend to think the right is bad, but the right tend to think the left is wrong. Does that not apply to, like, Santorum types?
Ah, good question. That I actually answered in one of my recent articles called The Three Political Parties of America. Because the three political parties of America are the Republicrats, the scared religionists, that's your Santorum, and then the peace and freedom people, and that's us. Right. So yeah, I mean, look, it's now hold on, let me. Does that not apply?
The fact that we all dislike it.
Right. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. They are. They stretch this analysis. Yeah. In the sense that if you're Santorum, you believe you have a hotline to the revealed truth that is the truth about what is good, and therefore, if you're not doing that, you are obviously. Well, obviously, it goes like this, right? On the good-bad axis, good is Santorum's version of Catholic Christianity. And on the bad axis is everyone who doesn't like Santorum. Sorry, bad. So yeah, I absolutely, I think you could probably say that. Yeah. But actually, I was the three political parties of America. That article actually, which does kind of address this, it did very well. It's one of the bigger ones in terms of readership and getting spread. So if you're kind of interested in that, I would, I will self-promote and say go to Huffington Post and stick my name in and and prove.
You're gonna write a book.
Yeah, I might. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could give a little more detail to. You're talking a lot about how the taxing system isn't quite necessary to fund government projects.
Yeah.
The taxing is still redistributive in some sense.
Of course, if I take something from someone and give it to someone else, it's redistributed, right? But what I'm saying is, the purpose of the redistribution is, as I mentioned earlier, is to basically deliver a social and economic good, right? What we're doing is we're looking at a distribution of wealth, and we're deciding that is not moral in some way, right? And so when people who don't really know about this monetary system, which is most people, are discussing tax, what they're trying to do is right or wrong, to some extent, right? So yes, it's redistributive. But what I'm saying is, it's like, it's redistributive in the sense that, if somebody has cancer and they have an ache in a limb, and you rub cream on the ache to make it go away, that's a treatment. Well, it might help, but it doesn't actually cause the thing that's going to cure the thing that's going to continue to cause the bad that you want to undo with the treatment, right? So, the purpose, the reason we have tax, let's be clear, is to create a demand for the unit of currency that is controlled and issued only by the government. That's the reason for tax. I said it once, I'll just repeat it. The problem, the economic danger that we're facing is the fact that there is no limit on government spending imposed by taxation or by the bond market. You often hear, right, that the bond markets are going to trigger the crisis, right? Have you heard of this? The news, that this is what they think, right? But what is it that's being lent to the American government when the American government says, we want to spend so we have to borrow money, which isn't true, right? The thing that's being lent are dollars that have already been created. Someone somewhere has got them, right? How were they created? The government spent them into existence before, right? So, just to be clear, so as not to confuse everyone, there are dollars created by banks, but they are created with corresponding liabilities at the same time. So when a bank creates a dollar, there is an offsetting liability, there's no net increase in financial wealth in the private sector. When the government spends, it generates wealth in the private sector without an offsetting liability. So the net financial assets in the private sector are exactly equal by accounting identity to the sum of government spending over time. I mean, it's completely, it's weird, right? But it's so. So actually, I guess to answer your question directly, because tax isn't needed to raise funds to spend, it is only redistributive. The only purpose of it is social engineering. You could put it that way.
So it's to give the appearance of actual redistribution.
Well, I mean, as I say, it is actually, at the point it's done, redistributive. But all it's doing is acting against a much bigger systemic redistribution that's completely corrupt, as I described.
So it's aesthetics.
Yes, absolutely. But you know what? Just to be clear, I don't think Obama and Bush and all the people up on the hill are evil. I don't think they even know this stuff. I think they genuinely don't know how the system works, about which they create laws, which is probably why we're in such a bloody mess. But there you go.
So can I ask a follow-up to this?
Please, yeah.
Without taxes, couldn't they accomplish the same thing through the legal tender laws? So basically,
right.
We have to use dollars regardless of the tax system because we have to.
Right. You know, that's a really interesting question, and it was asked explicitly by the European Union when they were creating the European, the euro, right? And they decided that, and they're actually right, that legal tender laws are superfluous if you have a tax system that is enforced basically at the point of a gun. All tax systems are enforced at the point of a gun. Right? So, because it's the fact that a large number, if not most, people have to pay tax in this currency unit, means that we will always accept it. Right? Everybody will accept it. Right? And even if you're not a taxpayer, if you want to trade with someone else who's a taxpayer, you want to use the dollars because he's always going to accept the dollars. Right? So there's always a demand. You can guarantee the demand. Once at the point of a gun, there is a taxation system. So the legal tender law is superfluous, although on the surface it does the same thing. To some extent. Yeah. Yeah.
I had a question on, you were speaking about Republicans and Democrats and how like, there's basic assumptions that they both make that people don't really question. However, you also talked about how European versus American politics, Americans tend to do question the assumptions more so than the Europeans. Could you clarify?
Right. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a good point. I guess there's a large part of that answer is going to be a qualitative versus a quantitative difference. So I would say that some of the most important assumptions, well, indeed the ones I'm discussing, obviously the ones that I think are most important, that bear on our liberty, on our basic civil rights, and I'm being kind of very, what's the word? Yeah, and I mean that only in as far as I think what I've described offends both liberal and conservative, right? So, these offences are not questioned in Europe as they are beginning to be questioned here in the US. So I guess to be clear, what I should say is, I think what I was describing is how it has been in the United States. And I think the Ron Paul movement, the liberty movement, is evidence of these assumptions getting questioned. There is no such movement in Europe, right? I actually think it is a wonderful, beautiful, delicious irony, for example, right? That the most significant, for my money, peace movement in the Western world is coalescing around an old septuagenarian, conservative, Republican, white male, right? Who's supposed to be starting wars, right? At least that's going on here, right? At least there is such a movement. I just see the apathy in Europe, this complete apathy, that you might say that Europe and America have been very similar, but they're now moving apart. And they're moving apart in as much as Ron Paul's support has quadrupled in the last 4 years, or tripled, depending on how you measure it. So yeah, so the other part of the answer is time, past versus present. Sorry, yes. Okay, yeah.
Oh yeah, I wanted to kind of piggyback on that when you were talking about American exceptionalism, and I might offer this for you to consider. America and Europe, and Europe's coming around to it, certainly with the collapse of the whole European Union.
Let's hope so.
And thank God that you've got Hannon and Henninger over there. They're actually capturing on these things.
Yeah.
The very essence of American exceptionalism is natural rights, which
yes.
Magna Carta was still the king granting, and we
exactly.
Americans believe that we we have rights that presuppose government, that pre-exist government, that can't be taken away, whereas Europeans still
Yes.
live under that statist idea.
Right, and no, absolutely right. And in answer to your question, the first line of the European Constitution, I think it's the first line, would make you cringe. It is an abomination. Right? The European Constitution, which is this thick, says that it's the driving purpose, as opposed to natural rights, which is the driving purpose of the American Constitution, it's nothing to do with anybody's rights at all. It's the ever closer union of Europe. Now, who else has done an ever closer union of Europe? Napoleon, Hitler. You can go back there. And, I mean, the tyranny is built in. Now, that constitution was voted down. In each case, it was put to a referendum, because some of the national constitutions that preceded the European Constitution in Europe required a referendum to change their constitution over to the European one. It was voted down in each case. It was nevertheless imposed on 27 nations against the will of the people, right? Now, on that day, how many cities do you think saw marches in the street at the elimination of 27 sovereign nations? Not one. That's the difference between America and Europe. And that's why I'm here.
The thing that's cool is that you see so many people coming about Europe, from Europe, saying that go along ball,
Oh yeah.
You know.
Oh yeah. I mean, no, that's
so
right.
And they're waking up too.
Yeah. I mean, we're really. All I say is Americans were ahead on the curve. Yeah, by a long way. I think by having, even if at a basic level, philosophical sensibility about their politics. So I'll go there first. And
one in the back, and then.
Yeah.
Sorry, just one more thing about the American money creation. We were speaking how they spend the money in existence, creating the assets without the liabilities. Well, then what's the debt? I mean,
Oh, that's a great question. What is the debt? In the book that I might well write, it's actually half written. I've got quite a lot on that. The debt is now this gets quite technical, right? Because the word is used in different ways. Okay, one way of understanding debt, which when you talk about 15 trillion, say 15 trillion debt, right? That is the sum of excess government spending over revenue, right? Which is how you can get a debt if you're a currency user and not a currency issuer, right? So often when we use the word debt, we just mean that, right? So the government debt, in that sense, is identically to the penny, it's an accounting method. The net amount of financial assets in the private sector, which is really weird, right? But there's another way that we use debt. The media don't have a clue about this, they mix it up, which is treasuries, right? You buy a treasury, it's a piece of government debt, which is true, right? But what really happens when you buy a treasury? The Chinese have got a bunch of dollars because they've exported a load of stuff to Americans, right? So they've got these dollars. Well, the Chinese have the dollars in a dollar bank account, right? Let's say Chase, because it has to be a bank that can have dollar bank accounts. Let's say Chase has a bank account at the Federal Reserve, right? So there is a column, basically, on a computer, on a spreadsheet, on a Federal Reserve Bank, Chinese government, dollar cash, down here, right? Now, that money is earning no interest for the Chinese government. So even if you have a treasury that pays 0.1%, unless the Chinese want to spend those dollars, let's say to buy some gold from the Africans, right? If they want to actually have the dollars and they don't want to spend it on some other hard asset, it's in their interest to have those dollars move from this column in the Federal Reserve to this column, which is the Treasury column, but it is just a computer operation. And what that means is it goes from a checking account to a savings account, and they will then get some interest on their money. And that's actually part of the reason why the Japanese have been able to run up this huge debt, right? They have massive debt, but they still have really low interest rates. Right? Because does that make sense? Right. It's not like anything you've ever discovered by listening to the media. Inflation. And of course, meanwhile, you've got a massive movement of wealth to those that actually hold these bits of creative, pseudo wealth, right? As they create them on a special license. So the debt is used, I would say, broadly in two ways. Excess spending over revenues over time, one, and the actual amount of treasuries purchased, which is really just an operation on a spreadsheet of the Federal Reserve. Okay.
Who's buying all the treasury?
Say again?
Well, the Federal Reserve is buying, what, 61% of the treasury?
Well, yes, and it gets complicated because then you've got the intricacies of the mechanism where the Treasury and the Federal Reserve are different things. And yeah. But by the way, that whole thing of selling treasuries to raise money to spend, that is a shell game, right? Be absolutely clear, it's a shell game. Yeah. There's nothing, the monetary system is set up so that is not necessary, but it provides the appearance of a limit. It's really subversive once you understand it, but it's quite exciting to understand. Yeah.
Right here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, sorry, this is kind of off topic, but during your thing you were talking about women's rights, progressiveness. Then you were saying America is kind of ahead of the curve, but what about America having no women in government? And I know it's not no women in government, but I was kind of curious about your opinion. I know it's kind of uncomfortable because there's literally a ton of men in the room and very few women.
It's quite a few women as well. I see.
Oh, yeah. But just your view on women lacking in American politics and how it works maybe the blue.
I guess it's the same question as women lacking in anything, isn't it? At the top of corporations. And probably that's the same question. I mean
in comparison to other countries in the world, and how we fall so short in that respect. Not so much with the companies that's news, but I mean
Oh, okay. Well then, I see what you mean. Well then, certainly if you look, I guess at Scandinavia, I guess might probably be the best example. You've got laws made that force women, statistically force women into certain positions. In Britain, it's a little more hands-off, but there are explicit targets that are kind of discussed in public debate. I believe in leveling the playing field. And I actually think if you actually believe in the capability of women, you level the playing field and let them get on with it. And if that doesn't work, then that's because there are psychological problems with the men that they're encountering in the positions that, where decisions have to be made. But those psychological problems, these are things that always play out over time, because what you've really got is a form of cultural inertia, right? And the generation dies off. And I would want, the chauvinist, every generation has its form of chauvinism, right? And I think gender chauvinism, it's fair to say, is on the decline. Racial chauvinism is on the decline, and so on. And I would much rather let that play out, because I just think history tells us that once you start to force something, again, it's the method, that the ultimate outcome will be the method. And by the way, the only thing that creates division, one other reason why I love the liberty movement and what 1 stands for, is that when you don't do that, when you just give people the rights and the opportunities to just go be themselves and do something, if you do that for everybody, you have no cause of division, because you only get division in a culture when some people feel put upon by another group of people, right? And so if you have men being put upon, let's say, resenting the fact that they feel they didn't get a job because, you just cause more complication, then you have to undo that the next generation. So, society is unfair, culture is, there are always going to be unfairnesses, life is unfair, it's unfair. But then what we're really talking about is education and trying to address those unfairnesses. We're not trying, as I said, in a way you could kind of characterize my whole talk as saying, we have failed when we have tried to, when we have caused an injustice and then created another injustice to undo that injustice. Yeah, and I guess I just apply the same principle. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Back to the whole natural rights and constitution thing. In the beginning of the presentation, you were talking about the offenses by the Obama administration and the few previous ones.
Yeah.
That seemed kind of uninspiring, and yet closer to the end, when you talked about the similarities between Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party, stating that the Constitution is still the law of the land. What do you? Aside from citing examples with individuality, individualism, whatever. What could we do to encourage others to assert their rights?
To encourage others to assert their rights.
You know, because like the Patriot Act, the First Amendment, for example, the truth, the thing of truth as a crime. We know that is censorship, and that censorship is illegal, as it is an offense to the First Amendment. What do you suppose we could do to encourage people to understand that more?
One answer I'd give is everyone has to do what they feel they can, right? I mean, there's something I just need to put that out there as a qualification, because, and the reason I say that is because I know one day it's possible that they will come for me with guns, and I believe all of this, but what am I going to do in that moment, right? And I don't know that I don't know how far I will go to stand up for this, right? I haven't been tested, so I would always say, so the answer to the question I'm going to give, it can only be, you can never tell anyone to do anything, right? I guess it's something.
It's not about coercion, it's more like,
it's
like suggesting, like, teaching and reminding even.
Right, but the best way to do that, I think, is to have done something yourself, and then say, I did this and I'm fine.
And I suppose Brian Brady would be a good example of an influential person in that regard. So I understand you are an individual of liberty, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, right now.
And you've spoken quite a lot about it too, naturally.
And I've spoken Occupy and Tea Party. I've been to both sides of it. I might suggest this to you. Right the wrongs. If you see someone shouting someone down for something because they expressed an opinion, just look at the guy and say, you're a tyrant.
Yeah, I mean, be the change you want to see in the world is really good advice.
Actually, I like that thing with standing up to someone who's shouting another because of their opinion. If I was to be arrested, I actually have on me a printout of Supreme Court decisions regarding the right to resist arrest, for one. And two, I'm actually curious about the thing with citizens' arrest, because enforcing the part of the law that says truth is a crime is an offense punishable under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 242, the deprivation of an individual's rights under color of law.
Okay, so look, you're a good example then. First of all, you've got to know what you can do, right? And you're going to be able to use what you know best if you've learned, if you've read up, if you've learned an area that you're passionate about, like which you must have done, right? Which is what I'm doing, right? And so I think you've always got to follow your passion. But I think there's always a judgment call, right? And to be made. I mean, Peter Schiff's dad is in jail for not paying income tax. I mean, I'm paying. Do I want to? No, so I do think, it's so difficult, isn't it? Because there's always, throughout the ages, there's always going to be the argument between the high-minded principle and the thing. And sometimes, be high-minded when you've got a chance of setting something off, I guess.
Do you know if that person filing appeal? Are they filing appeals, or?
Yeah, he's in a cage.
He's in a cage, yeah.
No appeals or anything?
Oh, it's gone, it's cycled and cycled and cycled.
He also thumbed his nose at everybody and told everybody he was doing it, so.
Sure.
There's two kinds of crazy, right? There's crazy and then there's doing it in someone's front yard.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, are there any more questions?
We can do some more.
Directly, and Robin's not going anywhere after this, so you can keep discussing whatever you want. So if there are no more questions, just let you guys go. There's plenty more food in the back, so take that on your way. If you want to keep talking to Robin, he's right here. And if you want to talk to the Youth for Ron Paul people, we'll be in the room also. And thank you all very much for coming. And more round of applause for Robin Koerner.